Welcome to the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. I am your host, Alex Green, and I'm on a mission to bring the power of embodiment to people all around the world. In this podcast, we explore how embodiment practices, trauma healing, and knowledge about the human nervous system can help us find our ground, discover new sources of meaning, and create connection in an ever-changing world. The deepest change is embodied change.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm excited to be sitting down this afternoon with Anders Totten, and he's a longtime colleague of mine. We can trace that history a little bit here in a moment. But Anders is a structural integration bodywork therapist in the anatomy trains sort of lineage. It's Tom Meyer's work, based in Madison, Wisconsin. And Anders and I have known each other back in the early 2010s when we were at massage school at the East-West Healing Arts Center in Madison, doing our foundational massage training. And Anders, I remember you had some like carpal tunnel thing, and I remember trying to work on it a little bit at one point. But anyway, Anders and I have kept in contact through the years as we've both pursued our bodywork therapy careers, and with an overlap in structural integration training, and that's one of my foundational practices. Actually, even pre-massage days, that was my own foundational training through a particular lineage called Zen body therapy, and then a related one called integral body work. And Anders has had you can tell us a little bit more about your path of therapeutic massage, myofascial release, and then you really felt the call to do Tom Meyer's anatomy trains training. And of course, you've done a majorly deep dive into that world. That's the bulk of what I hope we can talk today about, is about structural integration in general, the world of fascia. Anders is going to be going to the upcoming Fascia Congress in New Orleans in a month or two. Our last podcast guest is also going to be there presenting, so we can talk a little bit about that. But yeah, anyway, Anders, welcome to the podcast. It's been looking forward to talking about fascia and structural integration bodywork with you. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
it's great
awesome.
to see
you. It is good to see you. And then the other thing is, so Anders is set up in, the other overlap we have is that I moved to Boulder, Colorado 3 years ago, and Anders was transitioning from, were we at GHC? Yeah, I think you were closing down your therapeutic work at a hospital and opening a private practice. And it was great. Anders was able to take over the same office space in Bedford Street, Madison, Wisconsin, that I was in. And even I think there's a picture of Ida Rolf on the wall that I bequeathed to you, or I think I threatened to take it back or something. But anyway, you have it.
I was hoping you wouldn't remember that.
I know. Too bad that I remember that. Yeah, that's okay. Well, it might be one of these things like eminent domain, right? Like after a long enough period of time, you're just like, no, you no longer have a claim to that photo.
It's a central piece in the office. She watches over my clients and makes sure that they keep their knees up on the table when they're lying down.
Oh, good. She's keeping you honest in your work. I usually go like personal history, but I feel like talking about Ida a little bit. Can we talk about structural integration just as a thing, and then we'll weave back to how you found your way there. But yeah, tell the audience who's never heard of Rolfing or structural integration or Ida Rolf, take us back to the 1950s and 60s or whenever it was, and tell, what do you know about the formative years of this modality?
Yeah, like the story that's published, I guess, is I probably won't be able to describe all the details super intimately, but from what I understand, it was just that Ida was shopping around for colleges for her children. And I guess this was a very long time. I think this was like the 40s or the 20s or something. I can't remember. It was a long time ago. It might have been the 20s. No, maybe not.
No, it was not the 20s. It might have been the 40s or 50s.
Yeah, maybe it was. But she was trying to find a music teacher for one of her children, and she was at some social gathering or something, and then was talking to somebody about a music teacher who was really piqued her interest,
Right.
and that this apparent teacher had fallen into a hole and injured her hand or her wrist or her arm or something, and was
Yeah.
unable to teach because of this chronic injury. And I just said, you just send, I think her name was Ethel, you just send Ethel over to me and I'll put her back together. And so I just started putting Ethel into these yoga poses and working on her and
Yeah.
forcing, if you will, forcing her into these, maybe forcing is a bad word, but it was probably primitive at that time, putting her into these yoga postures. And if she couldn't put herself into them, she would kind of manually.
Make it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was how it started, because then Ethel was able to teach her child music, and that, like, eventually more and more people started just arriving at Ida's doorstep to be put back together.
Yeah.
And that's then how it developed over the course of through the war in like the
Mm.
40s and 50s, to where she eventually created a protocol around it, which from what I remember was started as 7 sessions and then moved to 10.
Mhm.
Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I don't know that detail, but yeah. Yeah, no, and she was German American. I think she was American but German heritage, and she was like a biochemist or something.
Yeah, she's from Manhattan.
Yep,
And yeah, that apparently she was quite a personality from what I've read.
totally. Yeah, and she was starting to she was one of the early ones to be talking to basically putting theorizing that fascia was an organ of structure. And so, of course, that's become a richly developing field now. But at that time, it was a pretty new explanatory framework for thinking about form and structure. Yeah, how would you summarize, I guess, her philosophy and views? And she was interested in structure and gravity and function. Like, how would you articulate that?
Yeah, she was of the first, if not the first, I believe, to
Sure.
look at the fascial system and connective tissue as a means of a handle to enhance posture, but more, as she would refer to it, structure. Yeah, more and more study that we do into fascia shows us that she was right. It has taken a long time for us to fill in those gaps.
Yeah.
And yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, totally. No, but she seemed to have that key insight that organizing. She used terms like organizing the fascia, but also she had this. The part of the way I think about one of her sort of pioneering thoughts. Just there wasn't even a lot of massage at the time. There was some Swedish massage was there, but manual. I don't know how. I don't know. Maybe osteopathy was
yeah.
developed, but that's a pretty different way of pretty different system of manual therapy.
Well,
And I know she had yoga influence.
yes, but she also trained with some major osteopathic figures,
Okay.
and
Okay.
reportedly with the who was the guy who
Stills.
really what?
Stills, I think, was
Yes,
one of the.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. Andrew Taylor Still.
Right.
I think that's his name, right? Yeah, but reportedly trained with him, and
Okay.
she was out. I think from what I remember, it was like she was vacationing out in Boulder and got kicked by a horse and couldn't make the train ride back to New York, and
Hmm.
saw an osteopath in Montana or something who sufficiently set her up to go and get on this train ride back home. And
Yeah.
that was when she was really became more curious about osteopathic manipulation. And like my teacher Tom says that in a way structural integration is a subset, a soft tissue subset of osteopathic inquiry. That's
Yeah.
easily.
No, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then when I think of Ida, the other piece that comes to me is that she had a pretty developed philosophy that I mean, she almost took it into metaphysical and maybe even spiritual dimensions, but this idea that we live in the organizing field of gravity. Of
Yeah.
course, we all know that it's common sense. It's not like that's a big news to most people who, at least since the time of Newton, like we realize we're in a field. But for her, it was not just, but then the idea was like, okay, we do live in a field of gravity, and we can be either better aligned in relationship to that, or we can be more poorly organized where we're maybe working harder and things like that. And of
Yeah.
course, it's a biomechanical level. There's a lot of truth to that. If we have postural deviations or our head is hanging forward, then there's more weight. And so there's a biomechanical dimension of if we're better organized, it's going to be easier. But she took it further than that. It was like, no, but if I've heard the analogy, I don't know if she used this metaphor, but I know some other people have. It's a little bit like the rigging on a sailing ship. And so if everything is aligned well to the conditions of the wind, then you are in right relationship to that prevailing force of wind, and then you're going to be a speedy and a nimble and an elegant craft, using the sailing analogy. But the idea in this sort of human structure, similarly, that we are persistently within this field of gravity, and when we get more optimally arranged to meet the forces of gravity, not only are we biomechanically improved, but that other kinds of improvements show up. There's more ease, there's more efficiency, there's psycho-emotional, maybe even spiritual things that happen when we are not. Whenever I kind of evaluate any system of work, it's what do they care most about? What is their sort of one of their key axioms that they're most concerned with optimizing? And for me, that kind of feels that's how I've always understood Ida's central axiom is that there's really good reasons to be more harmoniously arranged and functioning within the field of gravity. So I don't know, it's my thoughts, but what would you add or subtract?
Like the prevailing story or like theory is that yes, we're reorganizing the inner gravity of the person
Yeah,
and doing it together. It's not like I'm doing it. It's an
right.
interaction. It's a collaboration. And then the prevailing theory is around the tensegrity idea,
Yeah,
that with a structure we have the compressive units
compressive forces of the bones. Yeah,
that are stuck in these tensional units,
yeah.
which are our soft tissue and fascia,
Myofascial. Yep.
and that like that whole system is its own contained gravity, and it's also plastic, right? Like that's for sure something that we've learned in the last several decades is that fascia has plasticity, and the same exact principle that gets us stuck in our ways, and if we're here or whatever, or we're like this, that
Yeah.
that same principle of gradually over time conforming to how gravity is winning the battle,
Yeah.
we use that to try to take the body out of that. It's the same idea that we can influence the structure just by how we train, how we live our lives, but also manually.
Yeah, through manual therapy techniques, through Rolfing techniques, structural integration techniques.
Which
It's funny.
the
Yeah,
mechanism for that is unknown still, but and it's something that we're learning, like what really is changing when we put our
right.
hands
Yeah.
on somebody's
Yeah.
skin.
Yeah. Is it collagen fibers? Is it the gel in the sole? Is it a nervous system response? Is it a combination? Yeah. Let's definitely talk about that, what we know and don't know in a fascial science perspective. But what's funny, you'll be interested to know this. I in the last year or two, I've become friends with a woman, old school Rolfer. Her name is Veronique Raskin, and she
Hmm.
wrote. Do you know that book, Remembering Ida Rolf? It's a
No.
compilation. There's a book called Remembering Ida Rolf, which is vignettes and stories, basically of just basically. It was published after she passed, and it was just a collection of anecdotes and personal stories, people who spent time with her. This woman, Veronique Raskin, she's French, but she came to the U.S. in order to study Rolfing in the Esalen days with Ida, and she has a piece in there called a Requiem for the Grand Dam or something like that. I think it might be the introductory essay, but it's a nice piece. But it's been very fun. And she's friends with Jan Sultan and some of the other kind of original class of Rolfers. And it's been fun just kind of hearing those stories of the early days and of all 1970s, 80s human potential movement, all the wild and crazy stuff happening. The hippie movement meets, but but she threaded her line with the things. But anyway, I'm
Wait, you
hoping to
said
get
Requiem for Van Dam? Is that what you said?
no for a grand dam requiem for referring to Ida Rolf. It was just like a commemorating this person. But anyway. Super cool. Why don't let's stay on this theme of like history and lineage, but then let's flow into Tom Myers, because like Tom Myers, your teacher, has completely been a major leading voice in fascial work. And from my perspective, he has not only influenced the field of structural integration, because his training more than mine, but certainly training with the Rolfing. I think he had some time with Moshe Feldenkrais, if I remember correctly. You'll know that story better. But then his one of his major claims to fame continues to be having written a popular book called Anatomy Trains, which is looking looking at the anatomy, the soft tissue anatomy of the human person, but not from the classical muscular anatomy perspective, but by groupings of muscles and connective tissue following what he calls myofascial trains or sometimes myofascial meridians, more like full body organizational sort of structures that can be discerned in cadaver work and stuff like that. So you will tell us a lot more about that because you know it better than I do. But anyway, but from my perspective, it's he has influenced so many other embodied disciplines
Oh yeah.
who really utilize, from personal training to yoga schools to other movement stuff, you name it. Almost it seems to be like the kind of leading anatomical framework because it's so useful as such a useful shift from the more classical anatomy approach. But yeah, why don't you share what you know about Tom and him personally and hang around with him? But tell us a little bit about Tom Myers' journey and all that.
So I believe Tom was Ida's anatomy teacher, I think in the 90s at the Rolf Institute. I
Okay.
could be wrong about that, but
Yep.
he developed the anatomy trains just as a teaching game. And he's a kind of a poetic, uh, he's an artist in a
Yeah.
way. He's a musician, I've
Yeah.
jammed with him a few times, but he took this like metaphor of locomotives and applied it to anatomy trains,
Yeah.
and then just used it to really drill in this very boring, dry material into his students' brains. And he's basically made a career off of that. But anatomy trains was fairly groundbreaking. It's been translated into over 20 languages, and it's like the most popular myofascial mapping
Yeah.
system that there is. But albeit there are many, there's the Philip Beach's meridians, there's Vleeming and what's Andre Vleeming's slings and such. There's of course the TCM meridians, which don't necessarily always have a physical correlation, but
Yeah.
can be compared to physical mappings of tissues.
Yeah.
I think Tom was really lucky and also just very persistent in shouting this from the rooftops. People took it and were like, this is actually a very practical and interesting way of looking at things, because the anatomy trains are made up. They're just like every other
Yeah, there's some, and he's the first to admit there'd be other ways to divide this. There's some arbitrariness
Oh
to,
yeah.
don't you agree? There's,
Well, there's the not only the longitudinal meridians, but there's also the latitudinal ones, the Schultz bands, right?
yeah,
You Schultz, right? I think
yeah,
that Tom learned under Richard Louis Schultz, and I don't know, maybe was inspired by him, but it's you can cut the body any way you want and say, look at this, right? That's what's amazing about the soma, is that it's totally completely interconnected, and also you can take it apart and look at little pieces of it.
yeah,
Yeah, like there's been a lot of critics of Tom's over the years, because a lot of people take the anatomy trains and mash it up with, like, you know, myofascial connections from a clinical perspective, where you have, for instance, the trigger points, myofascial pain dysfunction, Travell's work, where
hmm,
you have pain referrals, which there's a lot that goes into that, but a lot of people will look at this and say, oh, it's magic, it's this is connected to that, and so it must be that we're working this from there. And when they feel that on the table, it's very special and it's very compelling. That's real. But at the same time, anything can be parsed out and connected, and it's just a choice of how you want to look at things. And I know some of the big critics of Tom's have, I think, conflated his theory and his lines with other people's interpretation of it's all connected kind of thing. And
yeah,
it really is all connected, but it can be all connected in whatever the hell way you want it to be.
yeah.
That's always been an interesting argument that's been going back and forth over the years. And I was in the cadaver lab 2 years ago with Tom and Todd, who, I remember, or you have
Right.
some connection with them, right? Yeah, out at the laboratories for anatomical enlightenment in Boulder there. And we were, when you do that, when you go into the lab and, like, actually cut tissue, it's it's so abundantly clear how stuck together we are underneath our flesh. It's really cool. And we were lucky enough to be able to see the anatomy trains all dissected out, which was so special because,
How long did that take? So you're saying in your cadaver lab, each of the trains was independently teased out?
yeah, but they didn't do it there. They did it the week before,
I
because
see.
they were doing photography for the fifth edition of Anatomy Trains at that time. So
Okay.
they were retaking all of their old cadaver pictures from
Yep.
the third and fourth edition, or I guess it was the second and third edition. I can't remember. But Todd Garcia is Tom's kind of go-to man
Cadaver man. Yeah, of
for
course. Yeah.
dissection. Yeah, and he's incredible. But yeah, like, we just got to see them all dissected out. On the last day, they said, these lines are about to turn, so we're going to give you one last foray into the body and show you the trains. And they laid them all out for us. And
Yeah, how many are there? I can't remember, 8 or 10 or
anatomy trains,
yeah.
there are 12, I believe. Let's see, there's 4 arm lines, there's 3 functional lines, so that's 7, and then
Mhm.
there are 4 cardinal lines, and then the deep front line, so that's 12.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, they showed, they showed them all. Or wait,
Mhm.
actually, I don't know if they showed us the arm lines. I can't remember.
Mhm.
But either way,
Could you
it
like
was.
just see them or could you touch them, manipulate them?
Oh, we got to touch them. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mel, the CEO of Anatomy Trains, actually sent me a picture, like, a couple weeks later, of me just, like, excitedly playing with the deep front line in the
Yeah.
lab, which, like, you're not supposed to take pictures, but she's in charge of everything. And
Yeah.
I think she was taking promotional pictures or something. And there's this picture of me, like, wide-eyed, like, smiling, like, playing with.
Oh my God, you gotta send me that. I want to see it.
It's a cool picture. I'm quite proud of that picture.
Yeah, you should, as you
But
should
yeah,
be.
Yeah, but it was so special to be able to actually touch the anatomy trains.
Yeah.
The thing that I remember most was the lateral line, actually, which goes from the fibulary muscles, the lateral arch of the foot, the cuboid bone, all the way up the IT band, the abductors, and up the obliques and intercostals, etc., up to this up the scalenes, I believe. Or wait, splenius. Either way, that was crazy to touch that line because they cut out some ribs with it. All the ribs were there, and you could pull the quadratus lumborum and then feel it up in the splenius, and then you could pull and
vice
I can't
versa.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was like an accordion, and it was so crazy to be like, this is like mechanically accurate to how our ribs move in our system. It was so neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Wow.
yeah. That
Cool.
the Cadaver Lab was quite a game-changing experience, not only to see the anatomy trains, but there was some quite mystical things that I experienced in there.
Yeah. Tell us about it. But what else what can you share?
Um, First of all, initially, the first time you touch a body that has no subject in it is a very uncanny experience, and especially being that I've touched people for a decade who are alive,
Yeah.
first thing I did was just grab my cadaver's arm. And yes, it's a cold, dead arm, but the heaviness of it, the lack of response when grabbing it, all of that was so just like, I can't describe how exciting in a way that was, just because it showed me just the shell and showed me
Mhm.
like, oh yes, we're human beings with very complex lives and emotions and a psyche and all of this stuff. When we leave our vessel, it's just a vessel, and that on its own was just like so life changing for me, because I'd never felt that before. I started having dreams of inanimate objects turning into ghosts and flying away into the ether, and that was so crazy. But I think the probably most profound three little experiences that I had were with touching organs, actually.
Yeah.
My friend Jen, my classmate and friend Jen, called me over one day and said, "Hey, Durs, hold this." And she gave me a piece of flesh
Yeah.
or an organ, and I grabbed it, and I she put it in my hands, and I held it and felt this very profound sense of calm and grounding and softness in my whole body as soon as she put it in my hands. And I was like, wow, what is this? And she said, this is a uterus. And I was like, it was making these synapses connect in my brain, like, wow, I can feel it. It feels like I'm back in the womb. That was what it was
Oh,
like. When I held the brain
yeah.
after that was dissected, I felt this sort of wiry, almost stimulating alertness, for lack of a better term, which you wouldn't think you would feel when you hold the brain, which is squishy enough that you could squish
Yeah.
it with
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
finger. But that was weird. And then holding the heart, I felt a strong emotional sense and even cried a little bit.
Mm. Mhm.
It was a direct experience of, to me, psychic spaces, uh, that spaces carry energy
Yeah.
and psychic sentiment, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Wow. That's really cool to hear about. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
yeah.
I'm thinking about a
Maybe a little
film.
graphic, maybe a little
A
graphic,
little
but
graphic, but I don't know. We're body people. We got to be able to
yeah,
talk about organs and dead people. Have you seen the movie, a Japanese film, Departures?
no.
Oh, you got to see it. You got to, yeah, look it up. It's a cool film. It's about I don't know, I forget the Japanese term for it, but there's a kind of like a ritual of preparing the body, not like embalming. Yeah, I think it's like after the embalming. It's so for funerary services. But there's a particular ritual where somebody's role is to it's like a very artful preparation of, in terms of dress, but also like cleaning and also like some like massage and things. And it's done in front of the bereaving, the family members. And
Mm.
so it's ritualized. And so your role is to really get the body ready and present for then the funeral service. It's super interesting I think you'd find some interesting connections to that, the intersection of the enlivened, alive person, but then the shell, but then honoring not only honoring at an intellectual level, but almost at an energetic level, honoring the structure
Oh
and
yeah.
what. But yeah, no, you got to check it out. Departures.
Yeah, I remember you when we'd met for lunch that day when we were out there,
Yeah,
you asked me, "Did you massage the cadavers?" And I
right.
was like, What? Massage the cadaver? What are you talking about?" And I was really caught off guard by the question. And then subsequent to that, actually, in my years following training with one of my absolute favorite bodywork teachers, Wojtek Kakowski from Poland,
Yeah,
he I he was just a wizard. Is just a wizard. I have
yeah,
no idea how he does what he does. The second that he touches tissue, it just melts in his hands. It's so incredible. And I remember asking him during our training several times, "What? How do you do that?" And he's, "Oh, you just work a lot and go to dissection." And I'm like, "What do you mean? Give me some more. How can I get to that level of
yeah, yeah,
of of
yeah.
like
Touch and
awareness?"
yeah,
Yeah, and like ability. And eventually I realized, oh, because he would talk about this, he would drop this in, sprinkle this into his teaching over the years that I've gone and trained with him, where he'd say, when I'm in the cadaver lab, I don't dissect with a scalpel, I dissect with my hands." And I thought that was so crazy because I just like it, I never thought to do that. So now when I go back, I think I'm gonna give that a shot.
okay, good.
For you regular listeners to the podcast, you know that about half of these episodes focus on TRE, tension and trauma releasing exercises. And I wanted to make sure that you know about the Redbeard TRE certification program, our educational platform to certify others. And we have both an online version of that I teach, as well as an in-person version of the training that my colleague Ellen McKenzie teaches in Madison, Wisconsin. My next online certification training is beginning August 3rd and 4th, 2024. That's the first of 3 modules. And the way the certification program works is it's about a 10 to 12-month program divided into 3 phases of learning, each with a weekend connected to it, and then some one-on-one work with me and people on my team to support your learning journey. TRE has been a life-changing modality for myself. It's open to people with any background. I wanted to make sure you know about the program. You can find more information at redbeardtre.com.
Coming back to Tom, like you talked a little bit about he his innovative, groundbreaking anatomy work. Let's talk a little bit about his structural integration specifically, because there's different ways to train with Tom. You can learn different things, but in some sense, the deepest dive is to do the anatomy trained structural integration training as you have and have deepened into through advanced work and stuff. Yeah, tell us a little bit about his school of structural integration. What stands out to you about it in terms of it would not necessarily to compare it and contrast it to Rolfing and other stuff, but what in your mind, like what is the current tell us for somebody who doesn't know a ton about it, what is distinctive about anatomy trained school of structural integration?
It's in the name. It's very anatomy heavy. It's challenging anatomy. Like I say, he uses a lot of metaphors. The anatomy trains themselves are not the only metaphorical comparisons that he draws in the curriculum. There's many others, and it's quite intensive in that regard. That it's very heavy on biomechanics and understanding movement from that perspective, the anatomical perspective, knowing, I mean, they were very insistent that we knew exactly what we were on, when we were on it, and why. Body reading and postural analysis is also very emphasized in the program. So
Yeah.
we learn a lot of thinking about direction, but also how direction of the passes, how we're doing that, which is to some degree included in every structural integration training, but it was pretty particular in when we do it and how we do it, and especially how we do it related to imbalances in each territory, which is in our sessions mapped by the anatomy trains
Mm-hmm.
for the most part. Yeah, we always look in every session at session 1 is the superficial front line, session 2 is the superficial back line, up the front, down the back, and then
Mm-hmm.
horizontalize the sides. You do the lateral line. So that's standard in a lot of this bleed over in a lot of the other recipes, the other schools for structural integration in that regard. We have that added extra piece of we're looking longitudinally. We're not just compartmentalizing the blocks necessarily. We're looking more at the straps.
Yeah.
That's the biggest difference, I would say. It still follows the same kind of a template of superficial to deep and then integrating in
Mm-hmm.
terms of how it's organized as the other recipes do. But again, by the anatomy trains, the middle portion of the series, the core sessions, those are basically the deep front line cut into those 4 sessions: the lower half, the upper half, the deep back part,
Yep.
or the deeper structures along the back line,
Yeah.
and then the upper portion, the very upper portion, the top of the mountain of the deep front lines. Yeah, I mean, that's the major emphasis. Is it's quite, I don't know how to put it. It's actually quite a left brain sort of a program, which is not exactly my forte, which was one of the reasons why I wanted to go for it, was to just expand my consciousness in that direction, because I'd worked for a long time doing kind of more, I don't know, like nebulous kind of, I did a lot of Barnes stuff. I started doing more deeper, slow passes that were, from what I understood, emulating the Rolfing style, but
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't any backbone.
Organize it.
Yeah, there wasn't any structure behind my
A
understanding of what
systematized approach.
yeah,
Yeah.
and also just knowing what I'm on and why I'm on it,
Yeah.
which I try not to be too critical of myself in those early years, because certainly I thought I was imitating Rolfing, but I built my practice at Group Health Cooperative, the clinic, doing that. And I was really happy doing that. And that was once I started moving away from a little bit more away from Barnes kind of style MFR, which I still like and enjoy
Yeah.
and might pull out from time to time. But when I started moving away from that, I just needed some kind of better substance to feel more secure and foundational in how I'm working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Um, when somebody gets started with you and what's a first session like in terms of course, there's probably some hearing their history and this and that, but yeah, what's an initial session like, whether that's starting with session 1 in the 12 session series, or whether it's, how does it work from a assessment perspective? You probably have to do some teaching a little bit about how this is going to work, that uh, like perhaps do they sometimes they might you might call for movement, I'm guessing, perhaps during some, like, how do
Oh,
you
yeah.
educate somebody that, okay, this is, you're not just going to lay down like a sports massage, Swedish massage therapy, it's going to be a little bit different. So how do you convey that to a person?
I just tell them it's a collaborative project, which is
Yeah.
what was drilled into our heads in anatomy trains. And I figure that's a pretty straightforward way of explaining it. But
Yep.
yes, I do call for movement with pretty much every technique that I use,
Yep.
with some exceptions.
Yep.
The most important thing that, especially lately, I have been really focusing on and ruminating on is how this client is going to interpret and feel my touch, and how their body is going to mm, push back or relent against or work with how I'm touching them. And that's always like a that's it. That's usually initially in a session. That is a big theme of like, what does this person expect and what does this body expect?
Yeah.
Because they can be different sometimes. Then again, sometimes, and a lot of times, they're pretty together in that sense, that like a lot of people that do come to me expect and maybe project that I'm gonna fix them, I'm gonna help them, and then I'm gonna really dig in and really get into where the problem is, where's the root of it. And certainly that's what I love to do most. But that first session, I have to get a ballpark figure of how their body's going to talk back. Or when I inquire of this system, where do you want to go and how do you want to go there? I have to learn that language. I have to learn that body's
Yeah.
particular, what's the word, accent. I don't know. I have to learn their vernacular, where they come from. That's a big part of it. I try to I'll play with barriers, and of course always am asking and communicating, and just verbally as well as physically, like, where how can I meet you where you're at? Is it okay if I'm touching you like this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I do like to talk a lot. Not talk, how do I say this? I like to ask a lot of questions, and I like to really get a sense of that person's life and experience and the history of whatever it is they're coming to me with.
Mhm.
That's something that is so sacred to me, is during intake, just listening and hearing and doing my best to get a three-dimensional view of what's happening with them and why, and if I can even have an answer to why, or you know, that's something that I do take a lot of time with, especially initially. I do, to if they're going through a full 12 series, I like to give them a rundown of that so that there's not too many surprises,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's certainly some surprising things sometimes in a series. But yeah, and then yeah, an initial session is quite a bouquet of factors. And then the
Mm.
second session is usually where, okay, now we can get into the nitty gritty a little bit more. And we might be able to push the limit a little bit more and see what happens. But it all depends on what they come in with to begin with. If they say, I really like deep tissue work, then I might push it a little bit more that first session, or just be very aware of my mechanics and my body and how I'm moving and where I'm moving from, and see if I can't color their interpretation of deep tissue, because it's not always advantageous to just hammer into tissues. Some people might need that, but I like to be slow and be careful and be present with it. Yeah, and I get the best results that way, and the best exchange.
Cool. Super
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, let's talk about the Fascial Congress a little bit, because that I mentioned in the beginning that that's coming up in August. You're going to go. You've been before. I think it's what, every 3 or 4 years or something like that.
3 years.
But yeah, yeah. Tell us just about that world, the world of Robert Schleip, and just give us a little background of, and what, yeah, which number Congress are we on now? And yeah, tell us about that world.
7. We're on the 7th.
Okay. So 21 years in?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I probably I probably shouldn't. I should start with a disclaimer that I am by no means remotely an expert on really any of this, but that I've been just dipping my feet in the last several years with the training. There's also just been a lot of kind of upheaval in my personal life that has prevented me from really digging in as much as I would like to, or I'll dig in a whole lot and then get pulled out. But yeah, like the first Fascia Research Congress that I was at was in Montreal, and that was right after I had graduated from the program and got to see all my classmates. Got to see Tom, got to see Christy Harper, my fantastic mentor, and got to hang out and just have a really good time and again dip my feet into this kind of world of academia that I am absolutely by no means familiar with. But
Yeah.
it was I don't know, like fascia research has become, it has grown and become really quite rich in the last several decades, and especially with this Congress. I actually heard about the Fascia Research Congress initially in 2016 when I trained with Carol Davis in my first Barnes seminar, which was actually my first continuing education, I think, after school, after massage therapy school. But yeah, I'm excited for this year's Congress, especially Ellen Turgeson gave me a link. Ellen is a therapist here at Bedford who Alex and I both know. She gave me she told me about a podcast that Till Lukow did, who I've trained under as well, with Robert Schleip. And Schleip has always been probably like the king of fascial research. He's the grandfather.
Is he from Germany? I forget, or Austria, or where?
I thought he was from Germany. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay.
I think he speaks German. At least he sounds like he does.
Yeah, he
Um,
sounds that way. Yeah.
I can't remember. He's Schleip.
Anyway,
He's the
yeah,
guy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but he's going to be a keynote presenter as well as Stephen Porges this year too, who I learned through this in this podcast with Till, which I would highly recommend everyone listen to who's interested in any of this.
Yeah, you're gonna have to give us the link for this podcast. But anyway,
It's The Thinking Practitioner is what it's called, and it came out in May of this year. But anyways, what was I saying?
Gorgeous. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Porges. Yeah, Porges was, I learned in this podcast that Porges was the research director at the Rolf Institute way back in the day. Did you know
Have
that?
you ever? I did not know that, but I'll tell you what I do know is that he has a 19. I'm trying to remember the date, 1979 or 85 or something. He has these two articles that I think he's the second author on that I've always been interested in, and in a Journal of Physical Therapy. And I've read the articles, they're similar, there's just one follows up on the other. But basically the study was performing a Rolfing pelvic tilt, like a structural integration approach to creating a more neutral pelvic tilt, and then measuring vagal tone, so measuring the nervous system response.
Okay, I think I remember this study. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very vaguely, but yeah.
Anyway, and I always thought that was interesting, like that, because then he went on to develop polyvagal theory, and which is very dominant paradigm shift in the nervous system world. But yeah, no, his early, I didn't know he was formally connected to the Rolf Institute, but I knew he had done some research in that direction, which I found interesting.
Okay, so Schleip is framing this keynote presentation that he's about to give as something that made me really very excited. And of course, he name dropped Porges's keynote as well, and how he's excited to connect Porges with our world a little bit, or reconnect Porges with our world again. But
yeah,
he's framing this as a merging of the autonomic nervous system and emotional regulation and feelings of safety with fascia now. And I also listened to another podcast this morning which was Sue Hinsman's podcast of the Melt Method, and she also had Schleip on. I guess this was a little bit more recent, maybe the last couple of weeks, and they name dropped Barnes, who I thought was irrelevant at this point, but I was very intrigued by what Robert was saying in this podcast. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in this to go check it out. But he's, like I say, he's framing this as we've found the missing link between emotions and memories being stored in the fascial system and releasing it and changing it. And he talked about a study that it was a foam rolling study. I shouldn't even try to relay it, but that in depressive clients, that the epimysial tissue around a muscle, which is the fascial saran wrap around the muscle, not that permeates the muscle, but the outer layer of a muscle tissue, is denser and what did he and inflamed in depressive patients in this study. And he's claiming that there's some robustness to this study and that there is some legitimacy to this. So I'm really excited about this. But he also talked about how they did some kind of a controlled study where there was foam rolling. One group was doing legitimate foam rolling. The other group was doing sort of a mock-up sham foam rolling, and that the group that did well, okay, so both groups were read these words of that have happier, more positive connotations, and then a list of words that had negative, sad, depressing vibes to them, and that the foam rolling group, the real foam rolling group, were able to in this group of depressed clients relay some of those more positive words better than the group that did the sham fake foam.
The fake foam rolling group. Okay.
The fake foam rolling group was just a control, so it was all they
Yeah, it's
did was
control. Right,
they
right,
picked
right.
their head up, and then they dropped it back on the table or on the foam roller. So anyways,
The real foam rolling group had more responsiveness, more positive responsiveness to these words. So there was there's basically a reduction in their depression and anhedonia and stuff like that.
yeah, if you want to interpret it that way, yeah, that's I think what they're saying.
What
But
they're getting at. Yeah.
yeah,
Cool. I'm gonna read the study like this weekend. Yeah, cool.
I think he's like presenting it at
I
the
see.
conference.
At the Congress. Cool.
I don't know if any of it is
Yeah,
out
what's
there
out.
yet,
All
but
right. At a
he's
minimum,
talking it.
I'm gonna review the podcast. So cool.
You
Super
should.
cool. Yeah, I
You
was
should.
super excited that Porges will be there because Porges is a big influence of mine through somatic experiencing, through TRE, through the
Oh
neurogenic
yeah.
tremoring stuff. We utilize that polyvagal map a lot for autonomic state and the connection of autonomic state to embodied state and muscle tone and fascial tone. And you're right, in a way, like it's common knowledge among body workers, and it's even everybody on Instagram now knows the issues are in the tissues, right? So
Yeah.
everybody knows that, but
Intuitively, we
differing intuitively, some people know it, but more and more intuitively, we know it. And as body workers, we definitely know it because we see it. You work on a scar or something, and a memory comes, or the tears
know.
come,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
this kind of thing is so common. But it's interesting to see the different. I would call it converging theories because it's like Peter Levine talks in terms of body memory and procedural memory and has a working theory on why that happens from an implicit memory perspective in the brain and and so now it sounds like we're drilling in, and from polyvagal theory, we talk about as the system shifts towards from defensive physiology towards safety physiology, and then what that transition can be like at the body and brain level. And yeah, if it to me, if all these different understandings, which to me all seem true, but if they can, as they become even more coherent and organized, it's what I've really been dreaming of is less siloing that the
Yes.
acupuncturists are over there and the structural integrationists are over there and the body psychotherapists are over there. But so these things that are drawing in shared understandings and theories that are bridging across disciplines, this is totally what I think needs to be happening.
And that's something that I'm so excited about because it is my probably deepest conviction that I am not a tribalist kind of a
Yeah.
person. I am not a I don't know, a drama queen in that way. And there's so much infighting
Oh, yeah.
in the collective, but even within our tribes.
Totally. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's so much drama and crap in there that we can't look past the kind of we can't look past the fight and recognize that conflict is something that we have to integrate on a daily basis within ourselves to begin
Right.
with, So why the hell can't we do it with each other? And that has always been such a crazy, seemingly impassable dilemma in society that really hurts my heart. But when conflicting dogmas can come together, and I said merge, you said converge, when they can recognize the conflict and move forward in conflict together, and not necessarily agree to disagree, but agree to, or disagree to I don't know, I haven't necessarily formulated my thoughts around it super well, but like it's the feeling behind it is,
Yeah.
why fight, and why
Yeah. Yeah.
not just try and figure it out?
Oh, yeah, keep figuring out together. Oh, like you understand. You understand this well. And I'm reminded of this one goes way. This sort of, I wouldn't call this a debate. I would call this a friendly disagreement. But there was a challenge, as you will, between Feldenkrais people and Rolfing people.
Oh yeah.
And the challenge was, the question was, so the Rolfing belief was, okay, what is creating our movement limitations? And the answer at that time was restriction, myofascial adhesions and restrictions in the soft tissue. And then the Feldenkrais people would answer and say, that's not how we see it. We see it as how the motor and sensory
Yeah.
cortex are arranged. And we think of it
Right.
we think of it less as a hardware problem. We think of it more as a software problem, that the brain mapping. And so then one way that they tested it at some point was they mapped somebody's range of movement various ways, and then they anesthetized them. So
Yes, yes, yes.
and then did passive range of movement. And as a way to explore that question, why is this more mechanical? Is this more neurological? Is there some degree of both? But to me, those kinds of healthy questions and exploring all the fields. So I think all these disciplines do well to have a growth mindset that, like, yeah, we know a lot, we know we're onto something because our stuff works so good. And but to have that, to be able to listen into, what does this other discipline know about? Okay, we're not talking about it the same way, but we are interested in human beings and what creates how we work and what. So I don't know about you, but I at least sense within the world of somatics and body movement, not only movement, just embodiment and somatic work in general. I sense more of that sort of collaborative work than I did 10 or 15 years ago. That's just my impression, being an observer of the field, but and participant in the field. But what do you think?
Agree with that. Yet at the same time, there are still some, I don't know,
Dogmas,
very,
dogmas.
yeah, there's still some very entrenched behaviors.
Yeah.
And I think there that it, I think, yes, I hope that we can recognize that, like, it's all one thing and it's just different pieces of the picture. There's going to be things that are incorrect and wrong, and yeah, we'll learn those things, but I don't know, can we just entertain some notions a little bit easier with one another? That's always what I err on the side of, and maybe it's because I deeply feel fear rejection and hate conflict, but I, there's a quote that I love: conflict. Conflict is not the adversary of connection. Fear of confrontation is. I love that quote so much because, like, I don't think, I don't know. I don't think that we have to be afraid to confront those discrepancies. I think that we should do so joyfully and with
Yeah.
respect and love, because I think that that's part of the picture.
Yeah.
Arguments are part of the love of
Yep.
humanity in a weird way. I don't know.
Yep. No,
Yeah.
healthy debate, healthy conflict. Yeah, I totally agree. Super cool. I can't wait to I can't go because I'm traveling during the Congress, but one of my TRE neurogenic tremoring colleagues from South Africa, she's going to be there, and she's doing a short presentation on neurogenic tremoring, which is awesome because
Who's that?
her name is Lisa Kimball.
Okay, I feel like I know that name.
Yeah. She also does a lot of her specialization. She works with humans, but she's especially gifted and talented at working with horses, doing myofascial work and things like that. So that's part of her claim to fame around the world, is her equine work, therapy work.
So that was the
Well,
guest that you were talking about who was on your podcast
yeah,
before.
because
Okay.
she's presenting on neurogenic tremoring at this in New Orleans next month or in August. Yeah. So anyway, my point is I wanted to go this year, but I can't because I'll be overseas. But I am really looking forward to catching up with you and Lisa. I just want to, and I have the feeling that rich conversations and whatnot will happen at this one. So Anders, let's tie things up with a bow a little bit. What's to me this has been super cool hearing the origins of this work and your own what lights you up around it. And yeah, what would be your summary? What's sometimes I ask, where are you going with this? What's coming down the line? Or yeah, what would you share as closing thought?
What's coming down the line? Where am I going with it?
Yeah.
I don't know. I learned a long time ago that like serving others in this way or in whatever way comes up for me is just my purpose. And I guess the last several years I've been learning more just about like identity and how I fit into that or how others fit into that. And where I'm going with it is just to me serving my purpose, and it's something that I love to do and something that I can do probably for a long time. So I don't know. I guess I'm just out there swimming.
Swimming in fascia. That's a good medium to swim in.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. I love
Yeah.
it. Awesome.
Yeah. I don't know what else to say.
All right. Very cool. Anders, thank you so much. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Redbeard Embodiment Podcast. To learn more, visit us at redbeardsomatictherapy.com or send me an email at alex@redbeardsomatictherapy.com. If today's conversation resonated with you, help spread the word by subscribing and sharing with others. Hope to see you next time.